Okay, so we decided today to deal with the general questions and concepts that have to do with Kabbalah, with Zohar, with the way it is understood today. So let's start with the question of how to teach it to those who are uninitiated. Meaning, what we here are a group of people that have basis in knowledge in Tanakh, in Talmudic literature, in other sources. But how do you make it accessible for people who don't have these tools? So I believe that first, I mean, it depends really on the audience, but there should be some introductory class to the whole idea of mysticism and of the ability of humans to experience spirituality, and to show that this is something that exists across religions and practices, meaning that it is something that is inherent to human beings. I think that it's worth it to read some text from the Bible that we've discussed, and speak also about the what is called the ecstatic religious experience, which is the response that we have to beautiful natural phenomena or beautiful art or music and stuff like that. And then when I know that there are good books out there, Rabbi Gottlieb I think has a book on that, and the one that Caroline mentioned yesterday. Rabbi Kaplan has a couple of books that are speak about meditation and Kabbalah, and that could serve as introduction. Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz has also a book, which is Introduction to Petihat Eliyahu. I think it's called The 13 Petaled Rose. But I think that the best way to create a class like that is to read extensively, and then from that to call the things that most appeal to you. Because I think the best way for a class to work and to inspire the participants is when the teacher is also engaged with the material and not teaching it just as an academic technical knowledge. So once you really immerse yourself in that literature, I think that the probably the concepts, the ideas of the Sefirot as parallel to the Midot are the most, meaning our attributes of mercy and judgment, etc. Those are the interesting elements of Kabbalah that people can identify with. The problem is when I was teaching classes like that, people right away would say, "So what am I? Am I Gevurah? Am I Din? Am I Hesed? Am I Tiferet?" And I said, "This is not a horoscope. We all have a combination of our attributes and character traits." The same way that, and this is why it's conveyed in Kabbalah with this kind of a dynamic tree of Sefirot, where there's constant flow between the different Sefirot. So in that context, I would also recommend reading the book that I mentioned, Flow, by Csikszentmihalyi, whatever his name is, hard to say, Flow and Creativity, to get a sense of that. When you put them together, I think that is something that could help. Finally, there's in terms of scholarship, you have. I'm not fond of the Kabbalah Center, you know that, but you might find their books that could be good or helpful. In scholarship, the scholar that is most translated to English and considered really one of the leading scholars in the field today, living today, is Moshe Idel. Idel. Before him, you had Gershom Sholem, who was is also widely translated to English, but Idel is contemporary, and he would always refer to the work of Sholem. And then you have also the book called in Hebrew Mishnat HaZohar by Yeshayahu Tishbi, and it was translated to English. So Tishbi and Idel in scholarship, and other books that you have to look into, but most importantly, when you go through the material, you see the things that you associate with and you connect to. But that leads us to probably the other question that were brought up of the the practical application of Kabbalah, and at what point the we could take the knowledge that we have acquired from the study of Kabbalah and apply it in real life. So here lies the danger that you have with any abstract type of learning. It could be philosophy, or abstract mathematics, or even language. That you can have linguists that use their study of language in order to understand patterns in society and anthropology, and apply it, and maybe help societies grow and change and develop. And you have linguists who are so fascinated by the inner structure of the language that they will study forgotten languages and that nobody uses today. I mean, I'm not saying that there's no application. There is an application, but they never venture into that next step of where do I apply it. And that's a general problem of the concept of applied knowledge, that we as humans, I think we do enjoy the intellectual activity, so we could lose ourselves or in that realm. People think that it's something that's particular to the yeshiva world, that in the classic yeshivot of today, the Lithuanian yeshivot, the study is focused on Talmud, and usually without practical application. Meaning, you will have people who study for years Talmud and Maimonides and Rambam, and they will discuss the contradiction between the two. Even when it talks about halachic issues, they would analyze it endlessly. Why the Talmud rule one way and Maimonides another way, and how can we reconcile them? And it could be depending on one letter or one word. Yet, if you ask one of these students a practical questions of halakha, right? For example, how do I make salad on Shabbat, right? He will say, I'm not so sure about this, because some people say that you can add salt, some people say that you cannot, and the way you chop the vegetables, it could be problematic, and the board. So you know what? Best thing, just eat whole vegetables, on Shabbat. Just avoid. And you ask, wait a second, but haven't you been learning halakha for years? He says, I've been learning the mechanics of halakha. It's as if you look at the car, you look at all the components of the car, and you can identify each one of them and how it works with another one, but you never drove the car, so you don't know how to use it. That is a problem. So, but the same thing took place in ancient Greece between the sophists and another set of philosophers, where the sophists were engaged in learning all day long in the study of philosophy, and they enjoyed that. For them was pure spiritual joy. And the other philosopher said, but you're not contributing anything to real life, so we have a problem here. So when you take it to the study of Kabbalah, I think that this is something that has evolved over time. We went through the history of mysticism, and we saw that mysticism, in the sense of the spiritual experience and the ability of humans to ascend beyond their earthly existence, and to feel that they're connected to God and to the universe, or that they have a special awareness of themselves. This is something that goes at least to the beginning of the Tanakh, of the Bible, through prophecy, through some ecstatic moments that are mentioned in Tanakh. But the people who had those experiences were planted in real life. Moshe, as a prophet, speaks to God, connects to God, but then goes back to reality. And he's a leader, and he's a warrior, and he does all that. I think the analogy of the cave and the ocean that we did in the very beginning of that course is a great example for that. The ocean floods the cave, that's the prophecy, that's the spiritual experience, and then recedes. When it recedes, it is still connected to the cave, but the cave is empty. So there is a sense of emptiness, there is a sense of longing that I would want to be at that stage of steady connection to God, but it's impossible. I have to go back to the people and lead them. That is how we see the life of Moshe or the other prophets. The mystical literature that has developed during rabbinic times, which is mainly represented in Safrut Echalot Rabati and Yordei Merkava, those who go down to the ocean of Merkava, let's put it this way, and assuming that the names that we have in this literature are all historical names that of people that lived and practiced that, then what we see individuals who are engaged in real life. They do what they have to do, but once in a while they have this privilege or this rare experience of being of the mystical experience, or what is called the unio mystica, that this mystical union of them with God. For one of them, for example, is Rabbi Akiva. If we take the story of Rabbi Akiva literally, then Rabbi Akiva is a mystic, but he's also a leader. He's works side by side with Bar Kochva, so he's also a military leader. One could argue that his leadership failed in the political scene because he was a supporter of Bar Kochva in the rebellion, which had disastrous results. But that could be part of the messianic element of mysticism, which is something that we also have to touch on. And this goes on for the first 1,000 years after the destruction of the temple. We have this kind of dual existence of people who are learned and who are well attached to this world and to their community and to the needs of the community. And it's around the turn of the millennium and the first circle of Kabbalists in Provence, and later on when we go into Spain and the appearance of the Zohar, that we find a division where there are some people who are totally dedicated to this field of knowledge. You will still find people who are both Kabbalists and masters of halacha and leaders of the community, like Rabbi Avraham ben David of Posquer in Provence, and like Rabbi Moshe ben Nahmanides in Gerona in Spain. You will still have them, but you will have others who are totally dedicated to the learning, to the esoteric learning. Then, as we move through time, it becomes more and more. The rift becomes bigger. There is almost a clear separation between the men of halacha, the men of reality, and the Kabbalist. There are exceptions. So you go for example to a Tzefat Sefer of the 15th, 16th century. You find people like the Arizal and Rabbi Haim Vital and their circle, who are pretty much living in sort of a bubble of an elitist society of learners, of who they are all the only ones who know the text. And on the other hand, you have people like Rabbi Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, who was also a mystic, but at the same time was active as a community leader, as a rabbi, as a posek, as an author of halacha, etc. So I think the answer to the question of whether there is, one stage of the applicable knowledge in Kabbalah, I think that the answer is really who is the person. We have to look at the person who engages in the study of Kabbalah. Who is he to begin with? And his orientation will determine whether what he studies will be applicable or not. It's not inherent in the knowledge itself. Just as mathematics could be abstract or applicable, just as chemistry, even the understanding of chemistry, one could study and understand chemistry thoroughly, but still find no use for it. He just knows how things work, but he never uses it. So it's the question of the orientation of the person who's engaged in Kabbalah. I could give you a personal example from my family. My great grandfather, whom I did not know personally, he passed away in 1942. But I heard a lot about him from my grandfather, who passed away when I was 17, and I learned from him. So, and an article, I wrote an article about him. So, to remind you, I'll send it to you. It is coming up in the new edition of Ideas, the periodical by Rabbi Mark Angel. In any case, I wrote about this issue of Rabbi Ovadia, my great grandfather, was a Kabbalist, and he wrote extensively on Kabbalah. He wrote he wrote several books that deal with the details of the Kabbalah literature. He wrote a commentary on Etz Haim, which is the book written by Rabbi Haim Vital based on the writing of the Arizal. And he also wrote a commentary on the Idra Rabbah and Idra Zuta, which are parts of the later parts of the Zohar. I mentioned it's called Yain Areka. He also wrote a book called Minhat Yehuda, in which he deals with reincarnation, etc. So he covered all aspects of Kabbalah. Yet he was very much connected to his community, to his family. When I was asked once I was interviewed for a radio program in Israel. It was the day of his anniversary, which is 27th of Av, and they interviewed me and they want to hear about his life. So they asked me to tell them some of the miracles that he performed, because he was known as someone who was. And I said, I'll tell you one story, and the reason I choose this story is because this is something that is accessible and applicable. And this is the sort of the thing you say, you could do this at home. I mean, if I tell you something that a great rabbi did, or a great scholar, and I say, you can never do that, or in a way that people tell, miraculous stories about great people, then I'm not inspiring you, because you say that that person is in a different level, different realm. I can never be like him or like her. And that, by the way, and I'm opening another parenthesis here, psychologically tested and proven that when people think of a superhero, which is flawless, they become more passive. Meaning, people were asked, the experiment went like that. People were asked to imagine that they are a flawless superhero, let's say like Superman, and on the other hand, to imagine that they are a more human and flawed superhero like Batman. And later on, they were asked to solve a problem. The people who thought of themselves as Superman did not have an initiative or the energy to find a solution for the problem, whereas the people who thought of themselves as flawed in a way were willing to do that. That is because the people identified with Superman said, okay, when I compare myself to Superman, I know that I'm never going to be like him, so I can never solve a problem. Whereas people said, okay, if Batman, who's flawed and incomplete and he has his own baggage, can do that, then I can do it as well. This is what the rabbi said also when they spoke about leadership. They said, "En memanim parnas al hatzibur, ela im ken yesh lo kupa shel shratzim me'achorav." One can only be a leader when he has his own can of worms, meaning that you have to have some flaws. And on that, I'm adding one more thing. My grandfather, Rabbi Ovadia, his name was Shaul, so he identified with King Saul a lot, and he always felt, hurt that Shaul failed in his attempt to become king or to establish his dynasty. And he told me that, according to his understanding, the reason that Shaul failed was that he grew up in a perfect environment. It was too protected. Not to recommend that one should not be protected, but he said, you see, when Shaul went to look for the donkeys, after 3 days he tells his servant, let us stop now and go back, because my father is going to be more worried about me than he's going to be worried about the donkeys. Now, the donkeys, back in the day, they were a very precious possession. There was at least 2 or 3 donkeys. So these are like the tantamount of 3 cars being stolen from you. For Shaul to say, I'm going to go back home because my dad doesn't care about the donkeys as much as he cares about me, means that he came from a well-pampered household. And that's why he was not ready to deal with conflict. And when the people said, we can't wait, we need you to go to war now, he said, okay, I'll do whatever you want. Meanwhile, King David came from a flawed background. If you read carefully the stories about the early childhood of David, you'll realize that he was a reject. He was rejected by his brothers. They did not want to recognize him. When the prophet Shemuel came to anoint a king, Yishai did not acknowledge that he has a younger son. They sent him to tend to the sheep in the desert with the hope that he's going to be killed. But that prepared David to deal with conflict. So that is, in parenthesis, the importance of being imperfect, and that is also a concept that is constantly presented in the Zohar, and I'll get back to it later. So now to the story of my great grandfather. This is a story I told the listeners. I said this. He was once. He asked one of his students whose wife was pregnant, and my great grandfather knew, according to the rabbi knew that his wife is expecting. So he checked on her, like, how is she doing? Should we pray for her? And the student was avoiding him, and he felt that something is wrong because by now she should have given birth. So finally, when he pressed him, it turned out that they thought that the woman became insane after she gave birth, which we know today she was suffering from postpartum depression, and because they were embarrassed with her condition, they sent her to a foster family, to a Muslim foster family in a village. Now, my great grandfather, when he heard that, he stopped whatever he was doing in the yeshiva. He went home. He picked up his daughter, who was 17 at the time, and back then, I guess it was a wagon or something. I don't think they had a car. They went to the village outside Baghdad where the woman was. They found her in terrible condition. He went to a neighboring village, to the local rabbi, asked for food, said it was for himself, to not embarrass the woman, asked for the rabbi to pack it to go, took it back to the woman, and with his daughter, they took care of her for a couple of days until she recovered, was able to travel back to Baghdad, and then she recovered in his house with his family for a couple of months, and then he put her back with her husband, and of course he gave him a piece of his mind of how to treat that. But this is for me the Kabbalist. To say, if you talk to me about a Kabbalist, or any great scholar, or any great rabbi, or any great leader, and this is, you can see, like, from now, it's not an academic question, it's really something I'm passionate about. If you want to know if a rabbi, or a scholar, or a Kabbalist is a true leader, you don't look at his writings, and you don't look at his books. This comes after you find out the personality. This is the true Kabbalist, someone who cares for others, someone who's willing to put everything aside, including his precious study, including his own spiritual elevation. Then this is what you see. And there were many like that. I mean, I know a lot of people. So because I grew up within this environment of people who were also masters of Kabbalah, students of Kabbalah, and they were the genuine thing. Meaning, whether you agree or disagree with the full extent of the knowledge that they were analyzing and learning, their personality was shining. This is something that you want to emulate. So there is, as I said, there is in every field of study you could fall into this trap of being completely consumed by the intellectual joy of learning and not applying it. So that is on the individual basis. When we take it more to the general question of, one could argue what I'm saying right now. Well, if you study halakha or chemistry or Torah or physics, I mean, there are certain fields of knowledge that are more accessible, and there are others that by nature are sealed off to some people. So, and if they are sealed off, meaning they're elitist, right? They are just for a select group. So what about the rest of the people? And John brought up the word narcissistic. It's like, do you think that you are the chosen one, and what about the rest of the people? Which, by the way, is a question you could refer to all Jews, and we speak of ourselves as the chosen people. So we are elitist, right? And so in that sense, and when we talk about the people, the Jewish people as being chosen, I think it's the idea of it's sort of a focal point and concentric circles of knowledge and influence. That is, I think that we find it in many places in the Torah and the Tanakh, where the Torah says, I'm giving you this knowledge for you to promulgate that knowledge and pass it on to other people in other nations. In other words, we are not the chosen people because we are genetically or mentally superior, but rather we were chosen because of certain combinations of factors, which I think, it's personally for me, it's the verse that we mentioned several times about Abraham. He's the man of justice and loving kindness and an educator. So Abraham is chosen as an educator who could pass on education to future generations. And then the nation is given the Torah. The Torah is what makes the people chosen, because it has changed gradually our primitive mentality and made us more refined people. Yes, there were a lot of mistakes along the way. There's always the danger of religious fanaticism, but there are many elements in the Torah that are revolutionary, that have completely changed the way people think. When we say completely, it's relative. It's a process. The Torah is against slavery in its core, even though Torah mentions slavery. The Torah is against slavery. The Torah opens with the statement that man was created in the image of God, that men and women were created simultaneously, that all people must rest. So those are universal values. When you take them and you see the development of the Jewish people over the centuries, and other nations learn from them. Christianity adopted these values. Islam adopted these values. And that, for me, is the fascinating thing about the knowledge of Torah and how it is shared with others. And I think it's important, especially important today, when the biblical criticism and the question about the origin of the Torah is prevalent. Biblical criticism has made a long way since its beginning in Germany. Today, there's a new branch of biblical criticism in Israel that argues that even the concept of Havaya, the ineffable name, was a local pagan god that was borrowed by the Israelites, and then that is the biblical criticism on one hand. On the other hand, you have philosophers or historians like Yuval Noah Harari. He's very now. It was translated to English, very popular. His book is called Homo Deus, that takes spirituality completely out of the equation and rejects religion, rejects the Torah as something which is the product of a group of clerics, that had no impact on humanity. And I'm in between those two. I say, do you really think that a group of clerics who only cared about to aggrandize themselves and to make life better for themselves, whether by asking people to bring contributions or sacrifice to the temple, Do you think that they would come up with the idea of ve'ahavta le'racha kamocha, love the others, you love yourself, or all humans were created in the image of God, or God has no physical shape? Even if you argue that those were human ideas, they had a tremendous impact on humanity, and they're revolutionary. I mean, if a human created them, then that man is godlike. Let's put it this way. So, in the same sense, when we take this question to the elitism of the Kabbalists, I think the same paradigm applies that I mentioned about applicable knowledge. It's all about the person. It's all about the individual who's engaged in the study and how he sees himself vis-a-vis the community and the rest of the world. But John made a good strong argument by quoting this phrase from Masechet Sukkah by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, where he says, "I've seen the elevated people, and there are very few. If there are 1,000, me and my son are included. If there are 100, me and my son are included. If there are 2, it's me and my son." So it sounds like he's arrogant, right? It sounds like he's an elitist. Yet, one could argue that he did not dissociate himself from society. Not in Kabbalah. I'm talking about right now in the Pshat of the Mishnah. We know that he interacted with all, and he argued his opinions, and they argued back with him. It could be, it's interesting that in Talmudic literature, the rule was stated that the halacha never agrees with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, maybe because they saw it in somewhat of arrogance. But Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai recognizes it's also a question of being able to recognize one's greatness and one's knowledge. So maybe he stated it in order to establish leadership. But if you take that concept of being an elitist and you go throughout generations and you look at different people, you will find that those who had in them this tendency of being a narcissist used their knowledge as a tool to aggrandize themselves, whereas those people who naturally were more humble and more open to other people and were able to work with them on the level, saw their knowledge of Kabbalah as a tool to connect to other people. In other words, the knowledge of Kabbalah, which I think is just like religion in general, has the power to change a human being. It does have the power to change a human being if that person is willing to put time and energy into that. And that we'll talk about that when we get to the issue of the parallels between Musar and Kabbalah. So it has the power to do that. It has the power to change. But if one does not necessarily work on that field of how do I change my personality, how do I constantly reassess my life and my personality and upgrade and synchronize it with reality, if one does not do that, then religion, and even more so mysticism or Kabbalah, could become just a tool, not a tool, just a factor that intensifies the natural character traits of a person. I'll give you an example from the field of midot, of attributes. There was a story in the yeshiva world about a guy who was offered many good shidduchim. The matchmakers and the Rosh Yeshiva would offer them shidduchim, and he would keep rejecting them. She's not good enough. She's not good enough. Not wise enough. Not beautiful enough. Not rich enough. Whatever. And at a certain point, the rabbi pulled him aside for a discussion, and he said, "You're too arrogant. You really have to. You have to learn some anava, some humility. And I recommend that you read these books." And he says, read Mesilat Yesharim, Chovot Alvavot, and Sharei Tshuva. Each one of them speaks about humility. He says, "I want you to dedicate 6 months to this study." So the man study for 6 months. He comes back to the rabbi, says, I think I'm ready. And the rabbi says, okay, I have this girl for you. And he gives him the name. And the guy says, but wait, this is the last girl that was offered to me and I rejected her. The rabbi said, I know, but I thought now you're ready. He says, what are you talking about? She wasn't good for me before I was humble. Now that on top of all my qualities, I'm also humble, of course she's not good for me. So this is an example of an artificial knowledge that does not affect the person. He knows all about humility, but it never touched him. So in the same way, you could find today people who study Kabbalah that they're doing the same thing. They study Kabbalah. They are name droppers. And they could tell you, oh, they will roll off all the names of all the Sefirot and all the different constellations, and they will talk about the lower water, the upper water, and the measuring, everything. But they and maybe they even have sort of a meditative, experience. Maybe you have some of them who have that also. But if they come into that experience without the necessary humility and openness and willingness to work with others, it will not happen. More often than not, it does help. People are elevated by it, but the danger exists of just like the idea of applied knowledge, that one, not just applied knowledge. We spoke about the intellectual aspect of it. Now we're talking about the meditative element here, that one is engaged in this very, very exciting spiritual experience. The problem is that one could come out of it and say, wow, I'm so great. At one point I was humbled by being connected to the universe, but then he steps out and says, wow, I'm so great, I was able to connect to the universe. And he doesn't take it to the next level of connecting to the real universe, to the people there. And I think maybe one of the best examples in contemporary religions is Hinduism. Hinduism and some other Eastern religions that in different ways promote the perfect state of mind, either nirvana or through yoga and meditation and all that. And those are beautiful concepts, and people travel to the Far East to learn that. But the same system of Hinduism also still believes very strongly in the system of castes, of different social classes, and one of these social classes are called the untouchables. That I think it's about 5 to 7 million people in India who live in subhuman conditions in the name of that religious system. So that means that it could happen even on a large scale, that people will see themselves as elevated and therefore entitled and privileged. I would like to think that throughout most of Jewish history, this did not happen, that people like that were weeded out, and that is because at the end of the day, this is really the yardstick of Judaism. It's ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha, love the other as you love yourself. So yes, you could have had masters who went awry or who were selfish and who were self-centered, but society eventually kicked them out. It doesn't always happen, right away. But we tend to be, I think Jews tend to be very critical. We were trained to it by the Torah, by thousands of years of Talmud and Halakha and all that. We are willing to criticize, and it's good. So, again, to sum up this discussion of is Kabbalah as esoteric? Is it elitist? It's not. It's originally it had the idea of you cannot learn that, but then it opened up and people joined. And from the point of view of having access to this esoteric knowledge, it really depends on the person. If that person considers himself to be elevated and set apart from the rest of the world, he'll continue to see himself that way, and if not, he'll change. And that, I think, brings us to your other question, John, and that is the redemption of the nation, right? So how do we see the concept of the redemption of the nation within Kabbalah? So remember, I said that there are different branches of knowledge within Kabbalah, and there are many ramifications. Besides that, the three main ones, which I'll mention in a second, but the main branches are the theosophy, which is understanding of the activity within the divine world; theurgy, which is the understanding of how our actions affect the divine world; and practical Kabbalah, which includes meditation and the spiritual experience and the ecstatic experience. So the practical Kabbalah, if practiced, it's by very, very few people. Theosophy is the domain of those who study the text on a regular basis and are steeped in it, and theurgy is a system that was created by the Kabbalists, but then delivered to the people, and in some cases was given sort of a more simplistic view for them to be able to do what they have to do. Just as Maimonides puts his principles of faith, and he writes them in a simple form, so everybody could be a philosopher. So the Kabbalists say, okay, everybody should be a Kabbalist in order to achieve that action of theurgy, which is that through our actions in this world, the upper worlds are changing. So every time I do netilat yadayim, for example, I'm purifying something in the upper world. Every time I add 3 drops of water to a cup of wine, I'm causing the harsh judgment of above to be sweetened by mercy. So, and in that sense, not only am I engaged in this act of theurgy, but also I'm part of the mythical process that we spoke about, that in that my actions are connected to the actions of thousands or millions of other Jews, contemporary and also throughout history. So, and we all lead towards one goal, which is an inspiring concept. So now, but to the question of what is the emphasis of the Zohar? Is it on the? You know what I'm saying? Yes.
Okay, before you go on to the next point, so when you say that we have an action for the upper world, and you said with us being connected to, it's not just the upper world, then it's connected to everyone else on this world.
Yes. And so the idea that my action impacts the other world, the upper world, but also that this is a ritual that was performed by thousands of people before me and will be performed by thousands of people after me, and even now, as I'm speaking, is performed by thousands who live right now. Then we become part of a continuous chain of events, and it makes me important because I'm not just a dot, but I'm part of a linear flow of energy in the cumulative in the common consciousness of the nation. So that is the in terms of theurgy as it applies to the people, there are many halachot, many laws that have to do with that, and definitely the famous Leshem Yehud, the prayer that is said before performing a mitzvah, when one says, I'm performing this mitzvah in order to unite the Shekhinah with a Kadosh Baruch Hu, right? They say Le'hadashem Yud Hey Bevav Hey. I'm unifying the letters Yud Hey with the letters Vav Hey. This is the whole story that we saw yesterday and before that, and the description of the structure of the world of Sefirot, where the Shekhinah has to take all the neshamot of the righteous from this world and elevate them, and through them connect to Tiferet. This whole thing, every time a simple Jew says, before taking the lulav or making kiddush or washing hands, he says, "L'shem yehod kudsha b'chshei u'shchinte b'tchilu u'himu," right? In order to unite the holy name. How is he doing that? I mean, first of all, you have to. We saw that these concepts are so deep and so complicated and controversial, and that person comes and says, "Oh, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just tie up, connect, and bind the Kadosh Baruch Hu with the Shekhinah, the masculine facet of divinity with the feminine facet of divinity." So there was a big debate about that, and the Rabbi Heskelanda, the author of Noda B'Yehuda, in the 18th century, said that one should not say it. But this is one example of how the theology of the Mekubalim was delivered to the people. So when they did that, they basically said, we want you to be partners in the process of redemption. So we'll talk about in the next session about the personal and the communal and the national redemption as it's reflected in the Zohar and in other Kabbalist writings.